Greetings, Skinny Cheeks the Rogue here. This is my Stamina Nightblade DPS guide. Stamblade is a great option for stamina compositions in the Stonethorn DLC, and this video will hopefully help you get the most out of the class. First off, I want to give a big thanks to Optie for sharing his parse and setup with me that got him some really great results. He's a mad lad on DPS, so make sure to give him a follow over on Twitch and check him out here on YouTube as well. I'll have the links down in the description below. So in this video, I'll be going over all the big changes with the latest patch, the top race choices, the Mundus Stone, food and potions, gear, skill bars, champion points, some combat rotations, and finally we'll end with a parse on the trial dummy from Optie, showing a dynamic rotation that got him to 93.9k DPS. I'll go over my static rotation in this video as well, but if you'd like to see it in action, make sure to check out my previously uploaded video. I'll have a link to it down in the description. I've also been streaming, usually a few days a week. Make sure to give my Twitch page a follow to see when I'm going live. I'm happy to answer questions if you want to pop in during one of my streams. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. So what's changing with the Stonethorn DLC? There are quite a few juicy reworks to Nightblades. These happen to be the exact same changes that affect Magicka Nightblades though, so to avoid copying and pasting a 2-minute discussion, I'll just go ahead and skip over the Nightblade specific changes. If you are interested in that discussion, you can check it out in my Magblade video, which I've linked in the description, and there are timestamps that can take you directly to that section. Another change in this patch is with the set Relearn. This doesn't just affect Nightblades, but I felt like it was worth going over. The top end damage potential of it was nerfed to 75% of its original value, but the stacks required to reach that amount were cut in half from 20 to 10. So while it does see a nerf in fights where 20 stacks were previously easy to keep up, it will be more usable across the board now, as it's less punishing to lose your stacks since you can quickly build them back up again. And even though the damage was nerfed, it does still deal a lot of damage. Another notable set change is with Berserking Warrior, aka Advancing Yokita. The 5-piece bonus was buffed to give 13.9% weapon crit chance now instead of the previous 9.1%. This change paired with Major Slayer being more easily accessible in raid through the sets Roaring Opportunist and War Machine knocks Tooth of Locustes down a notch and makes this pretty much a must-run set now. If you aren't running in a group that has Major Slayer provided, Locustes is still a great option though. And Locustes is also nice on trash fights if you don't have consistent Major Slayer uptimes on that as well. For the race, the top 3 options we have are Orc, Dark Elf, and then Khajiit. Dark Elf is only around 0.5% and Khajiit about 3 to 4% DPS behind Orc under normal conditions. For Red Guards and Wood Elves, they're a little further behind the top end by about 5 to 6% or so, but have the benefit of really great stamina sustain. Other racial options aren't recommended, but even the races with no specific benefits for dealing stamina damage, like a Breton, only end up about 8 to 9% DPS behind, so you can still clear any vet content with any race, but you may be making yourself work a little harder for it. For the Mundus Stone, we're going to go with the Shadow. It did get a slight nerf with Stonethorn, but the 17% crit damage it offers with the full Divine's gear setup is still worth it over other options for Stamblade. For the food, we're going with Bistat food with stamina and health. It's the best option if you can sustain it. If you've tried using sustain skills and gear and worked with your group to coordinate sustain sets, but you're still having trouble running out of stamina, you can also use Artaeum Takeaway Broth. This is a bit of a hit to your health and stamina pools though, so really only recommended as a last resort if other sustain options have failed. For practicing on the test dummy, you should use the Lava Foot soup. For our potions, we're using max stamina plus weapon damage plus weapon crit. If you are double barring Camo Hunter, you really don't need that weapon crit, but this helps us to have a little more flexibility with our bar setups if there's situations where we need to drop it. Alright, now we'll go over the gear setups. This first setup is the double dual wield setup that both Optie and I used on our parses on the trial dummy. For the monster set, you'll want to go with either Maarselok or Selene. Maarselok has a higher end damage potential in trial environments, but does require bash weaving, so it's better used with surprise attack, since surprise attack is an instant cast ability, while rapid strikes is a channel. And then if sustain is an issue, or you're not comfortable bash weaving, or you're just parsing on the trial dummy, then I find that Selene alongside of rapid strikes is a bit better of an option. Selene activates from any direct melee damage, so since Rapid Strikes hits 5 times in one cast, it is a little more likely to proc than something like Surprise Attack, which just hits once during that cast. So again, to reiterate, Selene is kind of the easier option and Maarselok the more difficult option with the higher end damage potential. For our body set, we're going with Arms of Reliquin, and then for the jewelry and front bar weapons, we're going with Berserking Warrior. Ideally, on the front bar, you'll use an axe and a dagger. It doesn't matter which one is in which hand. On the back bar, we'll use our Black Rose Prison axes or daggers, and a reminder, you can get this on normal Black Rose Prison as well, so it's a pretty easy farm if you run it on normal. The only thing you'll be missing from the perfected version is a line of stamina recovery, and since it's the back bar set, you barely even notice that that's missing. Some people like to use 2 axes on the back bar, some people 2 daggers, some axe and a dagger. I found it really doesn't matter too much since you don't spend a lot of time on the back bar, but if you aren't using rapid strikes, which does proc bleeds a little bit more than surprise attack does, you might want to have at least 1 axe back there to help with your bleed up time. For the traits, we're going to go all divines on our gear, all bloodthirsty on our jewelry, and then on the weapons, we'll do Nern in the main hand and sharpened in the offhand. So I said earlier, it doesn't matter if your axe or dagger is in your main hand or offhand, but the Nern or sharpened part does matter. You definitely want to make sure Nern is in the main hand and sharpened is in the off. Another thing to note is that if you are in a group that is really optimizing for stamina setups and using trimmer scale and maximizing those Alkosh hits, you can get a little more damage out of precise than sharpened, since you'll have a little more CP to play with and won't need to stack so much into the physical penetration. It's pretty close either way though, so if you want to just leave it as sharpened and then adjust your CP accordingly, you can do that as well. For the back bar weapons, we want to go infused on both of those. And then for our enchantments, we want to run all max stamina enchantments on the gear, all weapon damage enchantments on the jewelry, and then on the front bar, we'll run double damage health poisons. And then on the back bar, we'll run a weapon damage enchant on one of the weapons and a poison damage enchant on the other. It doesn't matter which is which. And one last thing to note, Berserking Warrior is a heavy set, so you are forced into jewelry and weapons with it. So unlike other medium sets, it's not interchangeable with the jewels and the body pieces like it would normally be. Alright, on this next setup, it is actually exactly the same except for our back bar. So on this setup, we're using a Maelstrom 2-handed axe, and this will be infused for the trait with the weapon damage enchant. I use this setup to get my 92.3k Parse. It's actually exactly the same rotation as the double dual wield setup too. You just use the skill Stampede instead of Deadly Cloak, but I'll cover that more in the rotation section later. And in this third setup, it is again the same, except we'll be using a Master's Bow on the back bar. This will also be infused with the weapon damage enchant. Again, the rotation works exactly the same. You'll just replace Deadly Cloak with your Arrow Barrage, and then you'll replace Consuming Trap with Poison Injection. If you'd like to use a Maelstrom Bow, that can definitely still be done too. I won't be going over that rotation again in this patch. It's the same one as from my previous Standblade guide, so make sure to check out the rotation section in that if you wanted to still run the Maelstrom Bow. I honestly think they've done a really great job with Stam's backbar weapon options. They all seem to be roughly in the same place, so it's really just personal preference, whichever rotation you feel best about and whichever backbar option that you're most comfortable with. I will say that running double dual wield, so you have the extra major evasion from casting Deadly Cloak plus the 6% damage mitigation that the Black Rose Prison dual wield provides, does add a lot of extra survivability though. So since it's in the same damage range and you're a lot tankier, a lot of people prefer going with that setup now. I'll put some alternative set options down in the description below if you don't have some of these sets. And then also, if you're curious about where to find any of these sets, definitely check out esosets.com. It's always up to date with the latest information, and you can look up the specific details of a set and exactly where to get it. Alright, now I'll go over the skill bar options. For our front bar, we're going with Killer's Blade, Rending Slashes, Rapid Strikes or Surprise Attack, Relentless Focus, Barbed Trap, and then our ultimate, Incapacitating Strike. Then on the back bar, we have Camo Hunter, Consuming Trap, Deadly Cloak, Dark Shade, and then if we need some sustain help, we'll put Leeching Strikes here. If we do not, we'll use any Fighter's Guild ability there. The 2 Fighter's Guild abilities there on our back bar are flex spots. They're just there for the weapon damage boost, but if you have a heal or something else you need to put there, you can slot it in those spots. And then finally, we'll use the same ultimate on our back bar, Incapacitating Strike. We won't ever cast this from our back bar. Instead, it's there to give us our assassination passives. So that's the setup that Optie used in his Parse, and the only difference in that and the setup that I used is I put Camo Hunter also on my front bar in place of Rending Slashes, so I had just one less ability to keep up in my static rotation. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, but Rapid Strikes will be the better choice to proc Bleeds and Selene more reliably, and then Surprise Attack is better for bash weaving with Maarselok. It's probably good to note too that since Rapid Strikes is a channel, if the whole duration doesn't go off, you won't get the full damage from it, whereas Surprise Attack is instant, so as soon as you hit it, you get the full damage from it. So in certain fights, if you have to block heavily or deal with some other mechanics where you might have to roll or something like that, it's possible you could end up losing some damage from Rapid Strikes since you have to cancel the animation, whereas with Surprise Attack, you won't run into that since all the damage is instant. So I won't be going through all the passives in this video, but I will have a list of all the essential ones listed in the description below. For the champion points, the setup that I liked the most for practicing on the dummy is 66 Master at Arms, 13 Thaumaturge, 72 Precise Strikes, 55 Piercing, and 64 Mighty. Optie used a little bit different on his. He went 66 Master at Arms, 28 Thaumaturge, 56 Precise Strikes, 56 Piercing, and 64 Mighty. As always, depending on how your group is set up, you'll need to adjust your piercing points to make sure that you're hitting the 18,200 penetration. Due to the buff to Alkosh and also having Tremor Scale present, it's possible to not need any points at all into piercing, so I'll go ahead and give an example setup of CP if you don't need to put any of your points into piercing. We'll go 81 Master at Arms, 64 Mighty, 81 Precise Strikes, and 44 Thaumaturge. Again, you will need to adjust this based on your current group setup. For the green and the red trees, these are generic setups. You'll want to adjust these accordingly based on the specific content you're doing and also based on your personal preference. These would be just some default setups I'd use if I didn't want to swap stuff around, but if you want to check out ESO-U.com, it does have all the CP listed for the red trees based on what content you're doing. Now I'll go through the rotations. Just a reminder that the previous Nightblade guide video has the Maelstrom bow rotation, so make sure to check that out if you're looking for that one. I'll start off with my static rotation. So for the pre-buff, we'll do Dark Shade, Relentless Focus, and Barbed Trap. And then we'll start our light attack weaving with Deadly Cloak, and then Consuming Trap, Bar Swap, Rapid Strikes, and then our ultimate. Then we'll fire our Spectral Arrow, do 4 Rapid Strikes, and then fire the Spectral Arrow again, and then Bar Swap. Then we'll do Deadly Cloak, Consuming Trap, and then the first time we cast Dark Shade here, it will be a little bit early that we're refreshing it before it's run out, but then every time we get back to this point in the rotation, it should be recasting right on time. Then we'll Bar Swap and do Rapid Strikes, then fire our Spectral Arrow, and then 4 more Rapid Strikes, and another Spectral Arrow. If you are using Leeching Strikes in your rotation to help us sustain, it will be one of these Rapid Strikes, and this part of the rotation you'll want to replace to keep it up. And a few notes about this rotation: if your ultimate is not ready when you get to it at that point in your rotation, go ahead and cast another Rapid Strikes there, and then fire your Spectral Arrow, and then you'll put the ultimate right after that, and then so you'll do 3 Rapid Strikes after the ultimate, and then fire the Spectral Arrow again. So essentially you're just swapping your ultimate with one of those 4 Rapid Strikes right after the Spectral Arrow. Whenever Relentless Focus needs to be refreshed, try to make sure to do it outside of your ult phases. So during the second half of the rotation there, you'll replace one of your Rapid Strikes with a refresh of it. And then for your trap, you'll also want to replace one of your Rapid Strikes, ideally in that second half of the rotation as well, but sometimes you'll have to do it in that first half in order for it to line up properly and not drop off. I like to sometimes replace that first Rapid Strikes in the rotation with the trap, even if it's a few seconds early, just to avoid having to cast it during my ultimate phase. And then for execute, we'll drop everything except for Deadly Cloak, Dark Shade, and Trap. And then we'll only recast Shade if we're getting the full 20-second duration out of it. If you think the fight will end like midway through the Shade, then don't worry with casting it. And we won't need to refresh our Relentless Focus buff at all. Even though the timer runs out on it, we still have the 10% crit damage buff. Also during execute, we'll only use Killer's Blade and we'll completely drop Rapid Strikes from the rotation. And then during our ultimate phases, you want to make sure you have at least 5 seconds on your dots when you cast your ultimate so that all you're doing is spamming Killer's Blade. As mentioned earlier, if you are using surprise attack, you'll just swap that in for all the spots you see rapid strikes. And then if you're using a two-handed weapon on your back bar, you'll replace deadly cloak with stampede, or master's bow, you'll replace it with arrow barrage. You'll also replace consuming trap with poison injection if you're using the master's bow, and then the rotation can stay exactly the same. For Optie's rotation, it is a dynamic rotation. All the principles of execute will be exactly the same. Also, all the principles for swapping in abilities for using surprise attack or a different back bar weapon, that's all the same as well. For the pre-buff, we'll cast Relentless Focus, Dark Shade, Barbed Trap. Opening the rotation with our light attack weaving is Deadly Cloak and Consuming Trap, bar swap, Rending Slashes, and then our ultimate. And then we'll fire our Spectral Arrow. And then 5 rapid strikes, fire our Spectral Arrow, reapply Rending Slashes, and then bar swap back to reapply our back bar dots. You'll notice he is doing 5 abilities before casting his Spectral Arrow again, and this is because sometimes with higher ping or with a little bit of lag, you can accidentally refresh Relentless Focus early instead of firing the Spectral Arrow if you try to do it right on the 5th light attack. So doing it this way ensures that it will always go off, and you won't have to slow down your rotation a little bit to try to make sure that that Spectral Arrow fires. So at this point in the rotation, he's pairing Deadly Cloak with Consuming Trap and refreshing the other abilities dynamically. So try to, again, refresh Relentless Focus outside of your ult phases in place of one of the rapid strikes, and then replace rapid strikes with Dark Shade, Trap, Rending Slashes, or your ultimate whenever it's ready. And then the same principles apply with trying to line up your ultimates while all your dots are running so that you're doing nothing but spammables and firing Spectral Arrows. Alright, that's going to be the end of this guide. Thanks so much for stopping by. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or stop by my Twitch stream. We'll play this one out with the Parse from Optie. Just a reminder, if you wanted to see the static rotation for the double dual wield, I'll have it linked down in the description below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.